This is for EDL 854, Educational Finance of the Misting Booster Club Funds, and I am Nicholas Junker. So a little bit of the background of the case. This community houses George Washington Middle School. It's got about 450 students. It is traditionally a smaller community. It is somewhat like a lot of the communities that are in some parts of the country that are trending downwards in socioeconomic status, losing a little bit of their population to some of the suburban areas, and overall kind of struggling with their base demographic. And so that can create some issues as we go here. Some of the good things about this case and this school breakdown is that they have a strong PTA presence, which can be good because you want volunteers in your school. Parent involvement is important. It's sometimes difficult to get, especially with a teacher like me at the high school level. It can be very difficult to find parents who want to help, and I think it's great that at their middle school they have. The administrator in this case is Principal Stevens. Like I said, there's 450 students in their school building, and it's a little bit difficult for me to kind of stomach where he has just him and then 450 kids, and that can be very difficult, and so that's why PTA presence is important, but I think building teacher leaders is also very important. Okay, kind of a brief summary of the case. I broke it down into kind of two categories. One is the requests from Mrs. Bowman, and the second is the basketball game where the accounting issue takes place. So first I'll touch base on the cheerleading trip. Mrs. Bowman, a little background on her. She is a parent. She is a volunteer. She's had two kids that went through the districts and the school so far. They're currently at the high school level, and then one who is currently at the middle school level where Principal Stevens is the administrator. She has a strong relationship with the PTA. She volunteers. She is engaged in a lot of school activities, and so her relationship with the school is strong. She's had, like I said, students in school in the past. One of the things about her daughter is that she is a very successful cheerleader, and she has been recognized on many occasions on her great skills. And so because of her great skills, she has made a all-state team, and she would like to be able to travel to New York to be able to participate in an activity. And this activity and travel costs a significant amount of money. And Mrs. Bowman, her mother, would like for the school, the PTA, to be able to fund that trip. And as indicated in our textbook, PTA funds and funds raised for all students should only be used for all students or specific groups if they're raised for specific groups, not just a singular person. So, in kind, Mr. Stevens decides that and tells that to her mother that they cannot use specific PTA funds, and he cannot support the use of PTA funds for her trip. So this, obviously, Ms. Bowman is upset. I think it is $798, I believe, that she was asking for the trip, for meals, for lodging, and so it's a significant sum for a person to come up with on her own. So that's kind of the cheerleading part, and this kind of transitions slowly into the basketball game. As I said, Mrs. Bowman was a volunteer at the school quite a bit, and so it kind of trends towards this atmosphere. So after the engagement with Mrs. Bowman and Mr. Stevens and the lack of funding that he denied or told her that he would not support, there was a basketball game. It had the last game of the year, one of the biggest games, and so Mr. Stevens is very busy running around doing his things, and so he's got his normal PTA volunteers doing a lot of the things that he is unable to do while he's supervising. He's running concession stand, or they are running concession stands, the ticket gate, and so that is something that is important and helps him out as they go. The issue with the case is that happens is there are 10 tickets that are reported damaged and discarded. And the difficulty is that corresponded also to, at the end of the night, there was a $50 bill that was missing. The way we know there was a $50 bill missing is the principal saw a gentleman come in and pay specifically with a $50 bill. And so this will lead into some issues with funding and issues with making sure that we know how much money they have left, and we'll see from here. So category 1, we have to identify the problem and analyze it. So things that I know is that there are $50 missing. And Mr. Stevens saw a man specifically pay with a $50 bill. Something that we talked about and I mentioned before is that volunteers typically run the gate and the concession stands. So without direct supervision from a staff member or an administrator, the PTA volunteers run the show. So that can be somewhere where there can be issues that arise. As I attested before, this was a very large game, full capacity, so the principal was unable to directly supervise any of the cash or cash handling. And so he believed that it was okay because he had set in procedures and safeguards in place to handle these issues. And then we have the reemergence of our parent who wanted funds for her daughter to go to New York to have a cheerleading event. Mrs. Bowman worked the gate. Now, something that I also know is that the PTA organization and the school had devised that there would be at least 2 members working the gate and the concession. And all that we know at this juncture is that Mrs. Bowman worked the gate. And that will be one of my questions as we go forward. And as I mentioned before, the costs for Mrs. Bowman and her daughter to be able to get to the cheerleading was $798. The direct correlation is the $50 that was missing. In theory, the simple thing would be that $50 is less than $798, and you would think that that would be not a significant sum for her to go out of her way to do. And then we have the secondary issue of the tickets, 78 through 88, were designated, torn, and discarded by Mrs. Bowman. In her financial report after the ball game, she wrote that 78 and 88 were 78 through 88 were designated, torn, and discarded. And so that brings up the issue of where the $50 is missing. So things that I need to know is what happened to the discarded tickets. Does the principal mentioned prior that he was trusting in his staff and trusting in his volunteers that they would be able to do things and follow the procedures that were necessary. And then something that I wondered was there a procedure for the discarded tickets? Is there something set forth where they know what to do once there's discarded tickets? Secondly, as it said in the case, 2 members was typically in the concession stand and at the gate. So was there a second worker on this during this contest? Would they attest to the torn tickets? Would they say something else? Would they know who stole it if it was stolen? Would they know if there was a bigger bill placed there? What do they know? Kind of what is their frame of reference and what they understand? Another thing is does their school or isn't their school, is there camera surveillance? I think that even at my small school, which is very small, 1A, and we have I think 300 kids in our entire district, we have surveillance in most areas of our school. And so I think if this came under an issue in our school, we would probably be able to decipher if so. And another question is there any $100 bills in the cash box? Because as Mr. Stevens attested, there was a $50 bill that was paid for the attendance. It could have been, the reason the 50 could have been missing was that someone paid with larger cash, and that's why I asked. And the last thing is, what safeguards and internal controls are in place for these issues? The difficulty being is these are volunteers, and so something that I doubt is that they know the safeguards and controls and accounting procedures put in place. So the basic problem is 5 things. They're missing money, which obviously is an issue because that money is designated for students and for students only. Missing or destroyed or discarded tickets. If we were to be able to get our hands on those, we would be able to know possibly what happened. Lack of internal controls and safeguards. There are various processes throughout the case that make you understand that maybe there are not enough, and maybe there are things that need to be put in place so that way you could have volunteers. But I'll get to that later. Lack of supervision, obviously, is important. It was a big game, but still you need to be able to designate a teacher leader or a supervisor to be able to help with the problem. And then an undefined financial relationship with PTA funds. As Bowman asked for PTA funds to be used for an individual trip, that means that the PTA and students and parents do not understand how funds need to be designated or used for student purposes. So my proposed plan of action has 2 pieces. One is a specific monetary issue to be able to handle the missing cash. And secondly, if there's not a direct handling of the monetary issue, then we need to be able to solve the underlying issues. I have listed here 6 steps for the monetary issue and 5 steps for the underlying issues. I'll touch briefly on a few of those. One of the things that is important is sometimes we just mess up. Sometimes we miscount, and I think that's why we need to confirm accuracy. We need to look at the concession stand transactions. We need to look at the gate transactions. We need to look at any fundraising transactions that occurred, just in case somebody has got an extra $50, because that's something that can absolutely occur, especially with not a tremendous amount of supervision. Sometimes things get mixed. And if that is the case, then I definitely need to contact my supervisor immediately, whether it's my superintendent, assistant superintendent, chief financial officer, whoever in the chain of command I need to talk to I need to get to quickly. And they will know what kind of policies that we have in place to understand if there are things that steps I need to take, whether I need to contact law enforcement, whether I need to do my own investigation, those types of things. And if they don't have any kind of guidance, I think that I will kind of handle it on my own. I will review all and any camera footage to be able to see if I can tell where the tickets are gone, when the tickets are gone, how much money is missing, what money do I have, what money do I not have, and go from there. And so if I deem eventually that I can't find any evidence from that, I will then schedule meetings with everybody that handled money at the game, from concession stand to fundraiser to gate to little girls selling suckers on the side. I think it's important to understand that we know who, what, when, where, why of all issues. And, it's one of the things we can talk about: torn tickets, missing funds, talk about their basic cash handling practices, if they understand the processes, and go from there. If we find the evidence, then obviously we'll follow the procedures set forth in district guidelines. But typically with theft, you would probably understand that you would need to report it to the authorities. Now, if we can't find any evidence and can't come to a conclusion on any of these issues, then we need to solve the underlying issues. And the underlying issues are, as I mentioned before, I don't believe that throughout this case brief that there are enough safeguards and controls, or maybe all stakeholders don't understand the safeguards and controls to be able to make the necessary accounting decisions that they need to make. Just talking with all of the members involved is important to be able to understand what they know, what they don't know. And once we know what they know or don't know, we can make necessary changes. We can review the safeguards, put in place things that are best practices, and make sure that they work, and make sure that we can make them work together. So then we need to reflect on the stakeholders' involvement and role in the PTA, because that's where our suspicion comes from, is that Mrs. Bowman needed money, there's money missing, Mrs. Bowman's around. Sometimes it's the easiest thing. Easiest solution goes to bat. But that's why it's important for us to understand the role of the PTA and the PTA as they go along. Also, something that I was thinking, and it's part of my thinking, feeling, and values, is that we need to find ways to assist Mrs. Bowman's daughter. There are various scholarships, there are private organizations, there are things that we can do to help her. I think that she achieved a particular goal, and we should somehow try to help her. And she's also achieving a goal for the school. So one of the things that I considered is maybe activity funds that are used for cheerleading or things like that could be used as well. Sometimes individual track athletes or golf athletes or things of that nature are given specific funds to compete in their activities. And if this cheerleading is a school-sanctioned event or a state-sanctioned event, then it should be able to use those funds. So here I listed a best practice here. That's kind of the things that we find out of our textbook. Just distributed leadership, make sure 2 people share responsibility, signatures on all relevant paperwork, accounting with supervisor, make sure you get a receipt in all actions, make sure to lock up money or items, inventory or tickets. That could be our ticket issue, and make sure we deposit in a night drop if it's a large sum, or the next day, or that week. If typically with a big game like that, you probably want to deposit in a night drop or the next day as immediately as you can. So these are some of the things that I think that are important to maybe these are best practice changes that I think Mr. Stevens could establish. So here are some of my strategies for implementation of my plan. I think the best way is an open and honest conversation with your stakeholders. You need to review everything that you know and that you know how to do and that they know how to do. You need to tell them that everything that you're doing or trying to do is what's best for students and what's best for the community. Everybody that is involved in the school process, especially if they're parents or just grandparents or members of the community, they contribute taxes, and that's their money as well. And so they need to understand that what I'm trying to do is trying to evaluate and reflect on these procedures to put forth the best thing I can. I also need to communicate these changes are not because the worst of things have happened. It's about community and school success going forward and doing what's best we can with our taxpayer dollars. Also, we need to make sure that we continue to cultivate strong relationships with all of our stakeholders. We have excellent volunteers at our school, at George Washington, and so I think we need to continue to cultivate those relationships.